So we get to finally talk about another iPhone that I think was probably one of Apple's most influential devices they ever made. It wasn't a flagship, it wasn't a groundbreaking device, but what this iPhone kind of led for the next couple of years from Apple, I think was a pretty big deal in my opinion. And this iPhone is none other than the original iPhone SE, the iPhone Special Edition, which was pretty cool. Now, I don't think this iPhone is necessarily worth it anymore, and it's kind of sad because I've been talking a lot about this iPhone the last couple of years, even this year specifically, and I still think this iPhone is beautiful. It brought a lot to the table at that time, and I do think in the overall span of, iPhone release cycle, this was a very cool iPhone that Apple, sent out, and I'm actually really happy they made it. Now, if you want to pick up some iPhones I would recommend this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of this specific phone, you can see we have that 4-inch IPS panel on the front, and it's a pretty small panel. It was in the same body as the iPhone 5S, so if you guys remember that one, and I think it still looks kind of good, it has a lot of bezel on it, and it is a fairly small phone, but I still know of some people, and even in the comment section of this video, you will hear people's, stories about how they use this iPhone and how they're still using it or something. I always see them, and they're really, really cool. You have Touch ID on the front, a lot of bezel, but it's totally okay. I don't have too many issues with it. You have the Lightning port at the bottom and a headphone jack, which is really cool. We don't really see that combo anymore. And on the back, we had this full aluminum back, which looked really, really good. We had those two glass shards on the top and the bottom, which I always found pretty interesting that they did that. I don't know why they didn't put a full glass back like on the iPhone 4S, but it's whatever. They eventually brought it back with the iPhone 10, and we have that single camera setup as well. Now, we don't have any wireless charging, we don't have any IP certification, but overall, this was still a pretty good phone that Apple released, and I do think at that time, it was a very important iPhone to, kind of send out. They already had all the parts for the iPhone 5S, for this specific device. They just recycled the whole entire phone. So they didn't have to reinvent anything. They just used the phones that they had before, recycled the parts, and then pretty much just put better internals in them. And that was pretty much it. So I love this iPhone. It did come out in 2016, so a couple months after the iPhone, 6S and 6S Plus, but Apple kind of covered a lot of different grounds with this. It was, I think, $399 when it first came out, but I actually bought mine for $99 brand new from Best Buy about 3 years ago. So that was pretty insane. These things, had a lot of deals, and I think a lot of people love them for sure. Now, talking about the camera setup, this thing has that single 12 megapixel standard camera on the back, and you could do 4K at 30 on it, which was pretty much the same exact camera as the iPhone 6S and 6S Plus. Maybe the 6S, this one didn't have OIS on it, but it was still a pretty decent camera. I think it's something about it being in such a small, form factor, and with the actual viewfinder being so small on the screen, it makes it seem like it's a lot better than it is. I saw the same thing with the iPhone 5 and 4S as well, and it also has a 1.2 megapixel front-facing camera as well. Now, I will definitely tell you, this is no secret, I don't think this camera is amazingly amazing anymore, but at that time, it was still pretty impressive that you were getting almost the same exact camera as the flagship iPhone on this specific iPhone, at least on the back. The front was a little bit of a different story, but I will tell you, the camera on this thing is still pretty decent. You can do photos, videos, no portrait mode or anything like that. But the good thing is that most applications really suit up the iPhone camera, so it kind of takes advantage of the full iOS camera, that you have, which is nice. But another thing is that this phone is still getting software support. That means that most of the applications that are still being made are going to be supported on the iPhone SE, so you can download applications that will give you portrait mode or give you kind of a cinematic mode feel to it. It's all, not hardware, it's just all software, but it's still pretty cool too. So in terms of that pretty much covers it up in the camera standpoint. Now, hitting on the software and the longevity aspect, of course, this is one of the more weirder aspects of this phone, and this is probably why I wouldn't really recommend people to buy it this year. This iPhone is probably not going to be getting iOS 16, and because that is probably going to happen, it really puts us in a weird situation to, buy this iPhone or recommend this iPhone to people, mostly because this iPhone is really not going to be supported for that much longer. So it doesn't make sense to recommend people to buy this iPhone and say, hey, go get this iPhone, it's super cheap and it makes total sense. That isn't the complete story, because you don't want to buy an iPhone and then have to buy another one 7 months later. I'm sure you just want to buy an iPhone and move on with your life. And although this iPhone is still a very good price, and although it still has a lot going for it, the software is one of those things that sooner than later, it's probably going to be outdated. So you're probably going to be in a better situation if you just kind of move on and maybe buy an iPhone 7 or 7 Plus than buy this specific phone. From what I've seen in my personal life, it just doesn't really make too much sense to purchase this phone right now because of the software, experience in the near future. However, if you need a backup phone, or if you need a phone that you pretty much just kind of want to, buy and maybe you'll use it here and there, then this isn't that bad of an option. But like I mentioned, you're probably going to be better off if you buy something like an iPhone 7 or an iPhone 7 Plus. So in terms of the software, that pretty much covers it up there. Now, in terms of the actual performance of the specific iPhone, this thing has that Apple A9 chip inside of it with 2 gigabytes of RAM. Now, here's the craziest thing about this iPhone. It is still a very smooth and fairly fast performing device. I've mentioned this time after time, but when you have an iPhone like an iPhone SE, it's not a slow performing device. I could say a lot of things about it, but it's not slow, and I'm actually a huge fan of the performance of this iPhone. And I want to say one thing. Weirdly enough, my experience on iOS 15 on all my devices has been pretty weird. I've been pretty vocal about it. But the thing is that with the iPhone SE, this device was one of the most stable, phones I had on iOS 15. It made absolutely no sense to me. It was so random, but I was super happy to see it and I was all on board for it. So that was a very crazy thing that happened. Of course, it, wasn't as fast as my iPhone 13s or anything, but it was still pretty impressive what Apple was able to do with this iPhone. It was one of the older iPhones supported on iOS 15, but it was one of the most stable ones I had. Now, when it comes down to everyday performance, it's a smaller phone, so I'm sure most of you will enjoy the performance factor of this specific device. On top of that, you do have, a really decent display, which, it's super small, so there's kind of like less pixels to push if you think about it. If you're trying to do like super heavy intensive games or heavy intensive tasks, that may also be a little bit of a different story, but I'm sure most people will enjoy it too. Like, it's not really that big of a deal. So I will tell you, if you just want to get a phone that will take you from point A to point B and you don't have to do anything super crazy with it, this is not a bad option. I think, if you just need something like that in that same realm, then, I would say, go for it. However, if you're trying to get a phone and you're trying to get the best value per dollar from a performance standpoint, this probably isn't it. Like I mentioned, I would go for something like an iPhone 7 or iPhone 7 Plus. This is something I would probably avoid getting just from that standpoint. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. And let's go and end it off with the battery life. This thing had kind of a decent sized 1624 milliamp hour battery, which is actually not a bad sized battery to have on this type of phone. It's a smaller form factor. Nowadays, obviously it's very, very small, compared to the iPhones that we have now, but this battery life wasn't that bad, and it was actually, I think, better than a lot of phones at that moment in its form factor for sure. Nowadays, it's definitely gone down, but my iPhone SE's battery life is better than my iPhone 6s's battery life on the same exact version of software. So I never really understood it. Maybe it could be the smaller display or whatever, but that was one of the biggest things that I saw for sure. So in terms of that pretty much covers it up there. And to be completely honest, like I mentioned, I just really don't think the iPhone SE first generation is worth it anymore. I mean, it's just the software that really kind of gets me. If this phone was still going to be getting the next couple of years of software updates, then I would say go for it. It only makes sense. But because this iPhone is in a situation where it's going to be outdated very, very soon in terms of software, I just don't feel comfortable recommending this phone to people. There's other phones out there. I mean, I would recommend buying an iPhone 7 or 7 Plus if you're on an extreme budget. Those are the cheapest iPhones I'd recommend buying. I think a great sweet spot is something like the iPhone 10. I think that iPhone has a lot of capability, and that is an awesome, way to go for sure. But I probably wouldn't recommend buying an iPhone SE. It just doesn't make too much sense to me. You're pretty much already outdated when you buy it. And if you need a phone that, you need to get it right now and this is the only option, then I say go for it. But if not, then I would probably recommend going for something like an iPhone 7 or 7 Plus, or going up to something like an iPhone 10 or 10R at the very least. So in terms of that covers it up there. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.